Welcome to Canadian Corner, the series where I explore the best and worst that Canadian television has to offer. Corner Gas is a sitcom that aired on CTV from 2004 to 2009. It's the creation of Canadian comedian Brent Butt. The show is about the lives and foibles of the residents of a small town in Saskatchewan called Dog River. It's sort of an examination of Butt's idea of what his life would have been like had he stayed in the small town that he grew up in and not pursued a career in stand-up comedy. It revolves around a very small cast of characters. There's Brent, the owner of a gas station. There's Lucy, the owner of the Ruby Cafe, which she inherits after her aunt dies. And there's Hank, Brent's best friend, who is chronically unemployed. There's Wanda, a very intelligent woman who works at Corner Gas. And then there's the parents of Brent, Oscar, and Emma. And to round out the cast, there are two police officers, Davis and Karen. And despite a few minor characters, that's all the people the show focuses on. But is it any good? I think while it does have moments of sardonic humor, it ultimately fails as a sitcom. This is for two reasons. The first reason is that these characters never grow or progress or even seem to be very developed. For example, Wanda has a child named Tanner that is never seen in the first 3 seasons of the show. He's only referenced when an episode needs him for the plot. There's one episode where Wanda is looking for a babysitter and no one wants to babysit Tanner because he's a wild child. And then the fact that Wanda has a child is not referenced again for another 2 seasons. It's odd because they live in a very small community and she's the mother of a child. She would mention this fact more often than twice in 2 years. Also, it's not just the character of Wanda, but if we focus on her, we can see the problems that this sitcom has. Wanda is shown to be the most intelligent person in this town, but she's never revealed to have any ambitions of leaving the town or any regrets that she stayed in the town or any satisfaction that she made the decision to stay in the town. Like, we know nothing about her interior life. It's just joke, jokey, joke, and then that's it. We don't know who the father of her child is, and we don't know what happened to him. Was he eaten by a bear? Maybe. You may be thinking we don't need this information because it's a sitcom and it's designed to make us laugh. Strangely, it's easier to laugh at or with a character when we know that character well and we care about them, or conversely, we hate them, right? We know them so well that we hate them, right? But when we don't know a character very well and things happen to them that could be humorous, it's harder to laugh. Hank's best friend is also shown in a similar light. It seems at the beginning of the show that he might be the mechanic for the gas station, but later he's just without a job. And if he is without a job and he lives in the middle of the Canadian prairie, then he must be getting some kind of government assistance that's never mentioned, or his parents were really, really wealthy, but that's also never mentioned. And it's not like a show like this needs to make sense in the real world, but the rules of the show need to make sense. we have other characters who have jobs. In fact, most of the characters have jobs, but Hank doesn't. As I said before, none of these characters ever progress in any way. In the first season, there are some hints that there will be some character development. Brent kisses Lucy, and Hank is in a weird, almost relationship with Karen, one of the police officers. But the next season, that's entirely forgotten. And the Brent and Lucy relationship is completely quashed. Although they do manage to make this funny joke where Lucy feels that Brent might be heartbroken and that she may have broken Brent's heart. But everybody in the town is convinced that Lucy is the one who has her heart broken by Brent, and that Brent is like this wild child, like really, really attractive guy, which is crazy and funny because Brent is this balding, overweight, middle-aged man, and Lucy is this kind of conventionally attractive woman that you have on Canadian sitcoms. But even though it's funny, it crushed any development that these characters had, and they just stayed static for seasons. It kind of reminds me of the show Friends, where the characters just stopped developing at the end of that show's run. Although, of course, Friends is a much, much better show. The second big problem with the show that makes it a failure is that everybody in this small town, or at least the people that the story focuses on, are all eccentric wackos. Brent, he owns a gas station, and he goes on vacation every year just by sitting in his front yard. Hank meets a German shepherd and thinks that the dog is the littlest hobo, which is really funny because probably you don't know if you don't know any Canadian content, but The Littlest Hobo was this sitcom from about 20 years before this particular sitcom that I'm talking about aired, where The Littlest Hobo was this German shepherd and would like go from town to town helping people. And it's funny, like it's a legitimately funny bit, but why would any adult man think that one, a show from 20 years ago was some kind of documentary, and two, that a dog from 20 years ago would still be wandering the wilderness and still be alive? It's really, really dumb. But the worst examples of this are Brent's parents, Oscar and Emma. Emma is a sort of embittered old man with a penchant for saying jackass and not understanding how the modern world works. Emma, though, is one of the most consistently unpleasant characters in the history of television. She's unpleasant because the show wants us to see her as this voice of reason, but she's constantly nagging people, and she's saying very mean things to people in her surroundings. And I guess that they're supposed to be jokes, but they don't ever land as jokes. And if you're saying mean things to a person and that person's not laughing, and the characters around her are not laughing, it doesn't work. I think that the problem is that there's no legitimate affection between Oscar and Emma. It's really hard to see why they're together in the first place. And I think it kind of bums me to say that because the actress who played Emma is now deceased. But I don't think it's the actress's fault. I think it's what the lines, she was just doing the lines that were written for her, and it was bad. And I think, again, we go to the idea of what needs to make sense in the world of fiction, because I'm sure everyone knows or has parents or relationships where they're together and you don't know why. you have no idea why. So for me, this does seem like a realistic depiction of relationships in small town Canada, where these two people, they met when they were in high school and they got married, and they're not really compatible at all, but they were one of the three options that each of them had, right? So it makes sense, but in terms of the actual show, it just makes it an unpleasant part of it. The fact that all of the main characters are these eccentric weirdos makes it really hard to believe in the premise of the show. Because, you know, in small towns in Canada, and not just Canada, but the entire world, not everybody is an eccentric weirdo. In fact, you're under a lot of pressure to conform and be normal and don't say weird things and don't do weird things. But here it seems everybody in this town does weird things. And I think that if these eccentric weirdos actually developed their characters, if the show permitted them some character development and made the characters have a little bit more depth, it would be much more enjoyable. So as it stands, it's a failure. And what it reminds me of is another classic Canadian sitcom called Schitt's Creek. So we can compare and contrast Corner Gas, which I feel fails, with Schitt's Creek, which I feel succeeds. So they're both very similar in that they exist in small town Canada. One is in Saskatchewan, and Schitt's Creek, it's not exactly clear where it is, but it seems to be somewhere in Ontario. And the premise of Schitt's Creek is that there's this really rich family, and they bought this town as kind of a joke, and then they lost all their money and they had to move to the town that they actually own because they don't have anywhere else to go. And because they're so rich, they're really out of touch with the fabric of reality as we know it. And in the town, there are a few eccentric people, but they're much more normal than the family are. I forgot what their name is. It's not Shits, but it makes more sense. And the main character played the main characters, and one is played by Kathleen Turner, and the other is played by Eugene Levy, and they work together for years, so they have like this charisma. They genuinely like each other, so that relationship makes much more sense than Oscar and Emma does. And so the reason Schitt's Creek works better than Corner Gas is because these characters, even though they are eccentric wackos, they have depth. They develop, they change. There are parts of that show that are heartbreaking, and it makes you want to cry. You know, and Corner Gas, I don't think has ever made anybody cry with real tears or with laughter. And a sitcom doesn't need to make you cry, by the way, but good writing will do that. And Corner Gas, even though it has really funny moments, it doesn't work as a sitcom because the characters are really flat and two-dimensional and never change. And the show doesn't permit them to grow. All right, that's my review of Corner Gas. If you like what I do, please leave a comment in the comment section because that's where they live. And please subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.